find that students at both institutions struggle with some of the same things when we're looking at quantitative literacy. But I think the exciting thing that I've learned at the community college level is by introducing this early and then scaffolding throughout the curriculum, at the end, you really get a student at the end of 2 years at a community college who can do some pretty high-powered statistical analysis. And I've been able to offer a research methods course now at the 2-year level. And just 2 years ago, every single one of my students transferred to another institution. And I'm really happy to say they all email me to tell me they're acing stats and research methods. So I really am a firm believer that we need to be doing this early. And I'm also a firm believer that we often think our students can't do things that they're quite capable of doing. And I've been amazed in the last really few years at the types of work that my students have been able to do. So what I'm going to talk about today is really the use of contingency tables. And the nice thing about SSDAN and WebChip, which we'll learn about in a little bit, is that students can run these themselves. But I often start with simple crosstabs and have my students just talk about them in groups. So you don't even have to have a lab setting to do this work. And I want to add also, I think what's exciting about this, you can have a very large course and make this work. You can have a very small course and make this work. There are all different ways of using contingency tables. I have had about every size of classroom and been able to figure out ways to have students talk about data analysis early in the curriculum. I think it's especially helpful to help students understand the concepts of independent and dependent variable. And I've learned that I've assumed too much, that students will test on a test that they know independent and dependent variable, but when you have them do practice exercises, they really struggle with that. So partly because I also direct a Center for Teaching and Learning, I do a lot of work on pedagogical practice. And it's been my experience, especially in an introductory course, that in order to use contingency tables, that there definitely has to be some pre-work with students. So one of the things that I try to do, and I've seen several faculty across the United States do this kind of work, that when you use contingency tables, you can bring them in pretty frequently in a course. When you're talking about any particular topic, you can pull a table up via PowerPoint or overhead, or even a handout and have students talk about it. And I continually bring in tables into my classes and have students talk about data. Just getting students comfortable with talking about data can be a really good step in getting them to kind of work with the data. And as I noted earlier, there are all types of ways. I've been experimenting for the last couple of semesters with having my students do partner projects using some pretty big tables where they have to analyze them and do some crosstabs, and they're also trying to learn a little bit about correlation. And again, I'm using that at the introductory level. I've also seen the use of student response systems or clickers with tables. It's really interesting to use these in a setting and pull up tables and have students click responses to their interpretation of the table. So I think what I'm hoping to kind of explain here is that I really think there are multiple ways of using these, and I don't think class size or the level of your student should ever deter you from trying these types of projects. And I think it's exciting. I have continued to find all kinds of exciting things you can do with it. So with good pedagogy, practice is important. And I spend a lot of time in my classes practicing. And I want to note that right now I'm on a quarter system, so we only have our students for 10 weeks. I'm looking forward to semesters we're converting in 2012, where I'll be able to do even more practice. But I often do practice contingency tables, practicing picking out independent, dependent variable, and writing a hypothesis. And I have discovered, kind of to my dismay, I suppose, and I think it's the state of quantitative literacy in this country, that no matter where I teach or what institution, introductory students struggle with independent, dependent variable, and they struggle with reading tables. They can read a basic table, but helping them how to read a crosstab table and or understand independent, dependent variable, and how to read and percentage a table, I'm constantly surprised by students' inability to do that work. So I think it's so important before introducing this to do some pedagogical pre-work. And again, I use what I call scaffolding, where I introduce them to easier assignments, and by the end, on an exam, for example, they'll get a pretty difficult table to read and some pretty difficult statements to try to choose independent and dependent variable. So this is an exercise, and what I thought I would do is show you some of the things that are available via SSDAN, and I'm hoping if you're participating in this today that you'll share this with faculty on your campus. There is, within the SSDAN modules, this was actually developed by somebody, I believe, at South Dakota. It's an easy exercise. I just put 5 to show you on the screen. But I think there's 10 of them, and I pass this out in a class. I usually have students do it individually first. I try to practice good pedagogical practice. So they do it as individuals, and then I break them up into groups where they try to figure out the independent and dependent variable in these statements. And this is an introductory exercise, and I just used it about 4 weeks ago in a course at a community college and at a private liberal arts institution, and I didn't have any students get all of these right. So helping students understand how you word and state independent and dependent variable, I think, are really important. And again, one of my pet peeves about pedagogical practice is that we know with authentic tasks that you continually need to help your students practice. So this is one good place to start. I have a lot of these that I've developed, and you have to teach students also how to write hypotheses. But this is a good one, and it's available, and I've adjusted and added to these. So it's that's the nice thing about SSDAN. There are a lot of modules that have been tested by faculty at other institutions that you can use. So then when it comes to table reading, this is an old one. I still use it even though it's old because it really throws my students for a loop. And again, I've used it at both the community college and at the university level. And again, I continually find students struggle. So I have a worksheet that goes with this, and I ask them lots of questions about this particular table. So some of the questions I ask them is how many variables are in the table. And most students do not get it right at both types of institutions. So you help them understand there are 4, and then helping them understand values of tables has been very interesting. Values of variables. They often don't understand what that means. So there are all kinds of questions, and I have them pick out various things about this table. We talk a little bit about correlation, and we talk a little bit about hypothesis testing, how this isn't quite hypothesis testing, but it's close. And again, this was an introductory table, and then I continue to make them more complicated throughout the course. And by the end, I do an exam in all my courses where they have to read tables and pick out independent and dependent variable. And last quarter and last semester, I had 2 courses. I teach a little bit less now that I direct the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I had a 100% in both courses and all the questions about table reading and independent and dependent variable. But coming into the course, they couldn't do this. So I think it adds a lot of excitement in sociology where students are learning a skill set that they can take away. But I really encourage faculty to not assume that students can read tables. And in fact, my guess is, after have done this a few times, is that when there are tables presented in readings, I think students skip them and are not reading them and looking at them. So I often make sure that when there are tables in the textbook or any readings they have, that they have an opportunity to talk about them and bring them up and discuss in class. So this is just an example of an exercise that I've developed. I continually bring in tables to classes and have students look at those. So I'm going to turn it back over to JP, and he's going to talk a little bit about how to use DataCounts.
Right, and so as I mentioned earlier, DataCounts is kind of our main repository for where you can find many of those modules, some of which Kathy hit on, and many of the data sets that we have available. So